35 years ago, I joined my university's animal welfare group, and that became the foundation for the rest of my life. So while we've come together this weekend to talk about how we might change things for animals, I really want to look back first over those years, because only when we know how far we've come can we see how far we've traveled. So having so many NGOs all in one room and looking across this sea of incredible faces, there's one obvious difference between now and then, and that is that there were far fewer established groups back in the 1990s when I started, and they were both smaller and less visible. Among the most established groups when I came were the RSPCA, of course, and two anti-vivisection groups, BUAV and NAVS, both of them founded by the suffragist Frances Power Cobb in the late 1800s. The resonance of their work was so powerful that more than 100 years later, vivisection was still the leading issue of the day. So I came into the movement in a pre-internet era, which was also a pre-large donor era. One way that both grassroots and professional groups raised funds was through street stalls. So we would lure the public over to sign a petition on a soft subject, and only when they got there did they discover the donation column and the carefully cited pot of coins that made them feel obliged to donate. Some days we could make a reasonable sum doing that. On other days we barely scraped enough money to get us home again. But there was power in those street stalls. We held conversations with people, we talked to them and connected with them, we handed out leaflets and often would watch them walk away completely engrossed in something they'd never even heard of before. One man visited a stall and he picked up a leaflet and he was so shocked by what it said that he took it home and he showed his brother. Both of them went vegan. Both of them became activists, and to this day one of those men is still a really, really important part of our movement, and all of that came because of one leaflet. So we spent our days doing stalls, sabbing our local hunt. This was the day we didn't find them at all, messing around. We protested circuses that came to the towns and the aquaria, greyhound tracks that were sited there. And once a year, the movement came together for a World Day for Laboratory Animals, as it was called back then. Tens of thousands of us would march through London, but it didn't get any media coverage most years. Even The Guardian back then was pro-hunt, very anti-sab, and it was very difficult to be seen, to be heard, or to have any significant influence. It was also really hard to convince people that being vegan was easy. This is one of the first cookbooks, the first one I had, published I think in the late 90s. So we cooked and we shared whole food plant-based recipes because there was literally nothing else to eat. There's no plant milk in supermarkets or in coffee shops. In fact, there probably weren't even coffee shops. I think if you wanted to meet someone outside of your home, you went to a Greasy Spoon cafe and you had a cup of tea and some chips. Or you sat in an eye-stingingly smoky pub and had warm beer and the only vegan option on the menu, which was, of course, a jacket potato. There was no butter, so you got that down dry, unless you got some beans, in which case you'd absolutely hit the jackpot. There are some items available in supermarkets and health food stores. A lot of dehydrated products. There was Bean Feast, I don't know if anyone remembers those. Yeah, virtually indigestible, absolutely horrendous. There were the nut roasts that you could still buy. And then the unfathomable sauce mix and burger mix, which were disgusting, but somehow people loved them. Mock duck was available in every health food store, which is strange, because there's not a single vegan that misses duck meat. And then there was Nuttaline. Cheer for Nuttaline, anyone? So grim. It was a slimy kind of peanut loaf that came in a tin. I tried it once, that was it. The first vegan cheese, or at least the first one that I knew of, was called V's. It came in a little jar. It had no taste of anything, let alone cheese, and it looked like something scraped out of an abandoned fridge. Milk was often chalky and lumpy, and it always curdled 100% of the time in hot drinks. So we perfected the old whisk and sip routine technique to get that down. There was one wine labeled vegan. It was Greek. It was called Dizos, which sounds like diesel, and I don't think that's a coincidence. It really burned the esophagus on the way down. But we did have bourbon biscuits, a reliable treat. So to anyone who had just popped into a bakery and picks up a vegan croissant, I say to you, you have no idea how lucky you are. Then came the absolute miracle that was Linda McCartney Foods. They arrived in supermarkets, a whole range of vegetarian products, 4 of which were vegan. There was the pie and the sausages and the sausage rolls we still get, and they did a pasty as well back then. One vegan group put out a press release saying that Linda McCartney was trying to kill us with its highly processed, high-fat, high-salt foods, and the rest of us ate them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Around the same time, Swedish Glass was on the market, and they had some amazing ice cream flavors, including some we don't get today, like pear, which was fantastic. And we truly felt like we had absolutely everything we needed. Unsurprisingly, given how little food there actually was, it was only those who were highly motivated by cruelty and suffering that actually were prepared to become vegan. And in my circles, they came from 3 distinct groups. They were the hippies who came to veganism by connection with the earth, by its inhabitants, by love, compassion, and unity. There were punks who were influenced by social justice issues, most notably anti-fascism. And then there were those who'd come through that historic anti-vivisection lineage. And this included some of the most impactful, wonderful people I have ever met. They were known to us affectionately as the Granickists. I have a lot of stories, so many, about Marjorie and Helen, and now they have sadly passed on. I get to tell just some of them. Helen was already 70 when I met her, and she was as radical as anybody I've ever met. She was absolutely in the thick of things. At one demo at Wickham Labs in Hampshire, her daughter got arrested. So Helen went up behind the police, the arresting officer, and smacked him over the head with her placard. He turned and saw it was her, and so wearily, because I have no doubt he had met her many times before, said, "Come on, Helen, we'll take you too." And she got in the back of the van. Marjorie had such a genteel air about her, but she got up to all sorts. One night, when running from some nefarious activity, this pair of septuagenarians cut through a churchyard to escape, and they fell into an open grave. They found that absolutely hilarious. My university, like many others, had an animal testing lab, and that was the focus of a lot of our work. One day, we had a day of action, and we were dropping banners off the top, and we stormed the building. All the activists got marched straight back out again. But in the melee, a couple of innocent-looking older ladies slipped in unnoticed. Soon the fire alarms were going off, the whole place emptied, and they disappeared into the building. A few minutes later, they came out, giggling away, as they so often did, with the jumpers moving mysteriously with the animals that they had pulled from the cages and stuffed up there. After university, I moved to Brighton, where my full-time activism continued, and I signed on the dole. It was a pretty lively time. Alongside all my animal rights activities, I was going to roads protests and was also involved with the squatted old courthouse building, which was set up as a community space. We had a vegan kitchen, which offered meals for £1, a creche, workshops, theatre, cinema screenings, gigs, and plenty of activism. My contribution was to set up an animal rights room, and I also helped to create their squatters estate agency to help people find homes in the town. The old courthouse was opened in protest at the Criminal Justice Bill, which was specifically targeting counterculture and protest. It aimed to outlaw raves with a ban on gatherings where there were repetitive beats. It aimed to outlaw sabbing through changing the trespass laws and ending travelling and squatting. One day, we joined a convoy of vans which ended up at the home of the Home Secretary, Michael Howard, who was the architect of this draconian crackdown. So in his garden, we held a mock trial, and I did what I so often did back then, which was to get up on the roof. Look at that little revolutionary up there. An image very much like this, but close up of me with a helicopter buzzing behind me, was on the front page of every national newspaper the next day, and my dad did not speak to me for 3 months. Brighton in the 1990s was a hotbed of activism, community DIY work, and unity. Environmental, animal, and political activists would all meet together in the Kensington pub, which itself was being squatted by its own landlord in defiance of the brewery forcing him to buy their extortionately priced beer. We produced an alternative newspaper called Snooze, and we absolutely felt like revolutionaries. Then in 1995, something big happened. The live export of calves and sheep from ports and airports around the country meant that animals were being brought through communities, residential areas, for the first time. and people were seeing this suffering that they'd never known was happening before. It brought a vast number of people into our movement. And these were not just people like us, these were respectable people, and suddenly the media coverage changed. At Shoreham Port outside Brighton, more than 1,000 people would turn up each time a ship was due to sail. And those Middle Englanders saw not just the brutality for the first time, but the police brutality to us. The Met came down from London to join our local police force, and they were put up in expensive hotels and given vouchers for expensive restaurants. And the preferential treatment they got created resentment between the local police force and them. And one night, we stood utterly confused watching police fight each other in the street. It was so hard to know whether to cheer. More commonly, though, it was us that was on the end of their aggression. And soon, we all wore their promotional badges that used to say, "I've met the Met," and which we doctored to add, "and I've got the bruises to prove it." Yeah, that's Helen Nelson trying to de-arrest my flatmate. God, I love that woman. There was a lot of good humor and chutzpah in our movement. One SAB from our group made T-shirts that criticized the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, for not introducing the hunting ban. And the T-shirts misspelled his name, so they read Tony B. Liar. But the SABs didn't want them, so instead, after Tony Blair did introduce the hunting ban, that SAB went to the pro-hunt rally, sold the whole lot to the other side, and we brought a new SAB van funded by the hunters. Thanks very much. In those years, I was called into the Dole office a few times to explain why I hadn't found a job, and I told them I had a job. I was trying to bring the government down. Because it was Brighton in the 1990s, they wished me well and sent me on my way. Inevitably, in time, things kind of tightened up, and it was clear I was going to have to get a job of some kind before they forced me to do something I didn't want to do. So serendipitously, a small, newly formed group called Viva moved to Brighton, and I got a job as a youth campaigner and school speaker coordinator, training others to speak in schools. I really loved speaking in schools. You got a welcome audience, people who really care about those issues, and it was a real first for me because until then we hadn't really had a chance to speak to people in any large groups because we didn't have social media. We relied entirely on mainstream media. So getting a press release out then was like we'd have to print 100 or 200, and we'd spend the day folding them up, getting paper cuts, all the press releases covered in blood, we'd put them into envelopes, and then we'd send them out. And then we'd wait, day, 2 days, 3 days, see if anybody would call or if they'd print anything. It was a pretty slow way to get anything changed. We were such a small team that we were often called in to do things that were not technically in our job description. And I was dispatched once or twice to film inside duck farms. Turns out my camera skills are atrocious, but I was quite good at getting ducklings out in my pocket. This is Jake and Jasper, who lived in my flat for quite a while and in my garden. One seismic thing happened to me during that time. Even back in the late 90s, Viva had a booklet about how animal farming was contributing to the climate crisis. But I'd not heard anything about a climate crisis back then. I knew about acid rain and about the ozone layer, but this was pretty shocking. And it was only then that I started to recognize that the impacts of animal agriculture were way bigger than anything I'd understood before. Towards the end of my time at Viva, the internet became available. Hurrah! And it was installed on one computer that we took in turns to use. We created a website and were able to send and receive emails for the very first time. And obviously, in terms of activism and progress, it was a game changer. After Viva, I joined PETA, where I ran its charitable arm producing humane education materials for schools, which we sent free of charge out to every school in the country. And I also wrote a report on the link between violence to animals and violence to people. And that was sent free to every police station, judges, magistrates, lawyers, anyone else we could think of who held a position within law enforcement. And throughout this work, I continued with my grassroots activism. In the Sussex countryside, not far from Brighton, there was a place called Shamrock Farm, which I know many of you will know. It imported monkeys, and it sold them to laboratories across the country and beyond, I believe. There had been campaigns to shut that down before, but buoyed up by the success of other similar campaigns, our local group launched our bid to close down Shamrock Farm. I could probably do a whole talk on that, and maybe other people will, but it was a crazy few years, and it did indeed close down. We immediately moved on to Regal Rabbits, and that folded in a record-breaking 2 weeks. I negotiated with the business owner, and he agreed to hand over to me personally 1,054 rabbits, which was amazing, but it kept us busy finding them homes for quite some time. I took in a few of those rescued souls myself. This is Doreen, a girl used for breeding, and Bert, one of the babies. And there's a legacy there, because 25 years on, I am still looking after rescued rabbits. In 2007, I joined Animal Aid, where I got to campaign full-time and lead the campaigns team. We campaigned then, as they do now, on horse racing, sport shooting, animal farming, wildlife culls. We worked to stop chemical testing and warfare experiments on animals. And we supported NAVs on an EU initiative to end the use of primates in experiments, which actually gained a lot of momentum and political support. I worked with Brian May, Lush, and others to ensure animals were on the political agenda in the UK, and I created a website called Votes for Animals. I think that was a good day at the office. We also conducted lots of investigations into farms, markets, horse slaughter, and we launched the first detailed expose of the UK slaughterhouses. This came about after the airing of a television programme called Kill It, Cook It, Eat It, which was huge at the time. A studio set up a slaughterhouse in front of an audience, and they brought in a single animal, and the lights were dimmed, and the animal was slaughtered. And then they butchered the animal, they cooked the animal, and everybody ate the animal. It was a sensation at the time. It was talked about so much. And a lot of people were reported as saying that they felt so reassured about how gentle the process was and how kind the slaughterman was that they'd started eating meat again. Well, we knew we had to counter it. We didn't know what happened in slaughterhouses, but we knew it wasn't that. So our incredible investigator got into 3, and then we went public. The media lapped it up, and we were inundated with supportive messages, not just from the public, but also from farmers, because they had little idea of what happened to the animals after they'd left the farm. We revealed through that investigation not just the horrors and failings of typical fast throughput slaughter systems, but also the routine and sadistic violence that's meted out to frightened animals in those places. From there, we just got into one slaughterhouse after another, which amazes me still, because all they had to do was put a lock on the door. We couldn't have got in. There we go. After every single one, we made national press, we did lots of media, and we added more list of workers to those being prosecuted. It caused panic in the industry, unsurprisingly. They kept wringing their hands, saying, how could we have known what was going on in our slaughterhouses? It was impossible to know. So infuriated by their contrived ignorance, I marched into our director's office one day and said, if they were forced to see what I see on our cameras, they'd have no excuses. We need CCTV in slaughterhouses. Can we start that campaign? And Andrew Tyler, who was an absolute legend of our movement, thought about it for no more than 10 seconds. He went, yeah, all right. And that was how the next decade unfolded. Those years campaigning for CCTV taught me so much about strategy, about how much to reveal and when, about building alliances, meeting with people you might consider your enemy, using the media to advance strategy and getting the most out of every investigation, telling stories to gather public support, and crucially, never giving up. Eventually, the law passed in England, then Scotland, and Wales much later, and Northern Ireland is just introducing it now. It was tenacity and determination that got us there, as well as having the right ask at the right time with a never-ending flow of evidence to back it up. And I want to say right now thank you to my investigator and to all investigators who put themselves in such difficult, dangerous positions to get the evidence that drives our work. I don't think we'd be anywhere near where we are today without them, and we owe them as a movement an enormous debt of gratitude. In 2015, I went freelance, and I got to work on some extraordinary projects with some extraordinary people. I worked with ProVeg, Compassion, I worked with EcoStorm, Animal Equality, Humane League. I was with Veganuary almost from the very beginning, and with $1 Million Vegan and Generation Vegan from the start of each. I helped to promote the launches of both VFC and Wicked Kitchen. I got to write for We Animals and Vegan Food and Living. I wrote websites, speeches for MPs, books, film scripts, produced films and documentaries, and I was a trustee for a grant-giving charity that merged with Veg Trust, for which I still act as an advisor. I've been so lucky to have so many opportunities to make a difference. And I've told you my story, not because this old gal wants to take a trip down memory lane, but because there's one really important thing I want you to keep in mind as this conference gets underway. We have come so far in the 35 years that I've been active. Hunting is banned, veal crates are banned, the production of foie gras is banned, sow stalls and tethers, live exports, battery cages, fur farming, testing cosmetics on animals, all banned. CCTV is mandatory in slaughterhouses. There are so many vegans, so much vegan food, we don't ever have to eat Nuttolene again. Car manufacturers can no longer use live animals as live crash test dummies. Yeah, they really did do that. Wild animals cannot be forced to perform in circuses. Snares are banned in Scotland and Wales, and that will happen in England soon too. Glue traps are banned. Goldfish are no longer given away as prizes at fun fairs. There are no more dolphinaria. The use of grey apes in animal testing has ended. Puppies and kittens can't be sold in pet stores. The Animal Welfare Act passed. The Animal Sentience Act passed. And those caught abusing animals now face much tougher sentences. And then, of course, the recent news, greyhound racing just announced bans in Scotland and Wales. This is not the sum total. There's going to be more I've forgotten. Plus, there are so many more local and regional victories, places closing down or ending their support for one abuse or another. And I want to put this list into further context. We've been farming animals for 12,000 years and exploiting them for as long as we've been human. Each of those bars is a millennia. And you can see where we come into the story. You can see where the first animal protection groups began. As a movement, we are just beginning, but we have come so far in that little tiny sliver of time. And the list I mentioned, the list I just showed you, is just from the UK. There have been enormous advances all around the world, and they're still advancing all the time, everywhere, right now. Things are changing, and they are actually changing really fast. So I want to say this. Any sense of our work stalling must be put into perspective. It might be true that we feel that vegan campaigns in this country have slowed down in the last couple of years, but it's not true of the wider animal rights movement, where huge gains are being made still. It's not true of the international vegan movement, where veganism is often still on the rise. And crucially, it's not terminal. We are not going to win every battle on the way to winning the war. But when we lose a battle, that's not a sign to give up. It's a reminder of just how much there is still to do. So we regroup, we strategize, and we push on. Now, I realize if we go back to that list and look at it again, we might argue that some of the victories are only partial victories. Hunting continues despite the ban. Hens are still in cages despite the battery cage ban. There is still fur and foie gras on our shelves, and CCTV cameras have not stopped the abuse of animals in slaughterhouses. And all of that is true. But here's another thing I want to say. The path to where we want to be is by necessity incremental. We will not get to full animal liberation, full animal freedom from where we are now in a single step. And we cannot turn around those millennia of human behavior in a single lifetime. We're in a relay. And our job is to take the progress others before us made and go as far as we can with it and pass that baton to others coming after us. Today, right now, we can work for a ban on foie gras and fur importation, but only because we've got those production bans. The government is planning to end trail hunting, but only because we already got the ban on live animal hunting. Colony cages will be phased out, but we needed to get the battery cage ban first. And I hope that someday someone will start the work to get robust, independent monitoring of CCTV footage. We always called for it, but we didn't get it yet. So I found some peace in knowing that even while we may not and almost certainly cannot end the exploitation and abuse of all animals in our own lifetimes, each of us can dedicate our lives, or a portion of our lives, to contributing something truly meaningful towards that shared goal. And while we may wish we were the era that could end that abuse for good, our role actually comes much sooner in the story. My own story as an activist started really early. I seem to have hatched fully formed as a campaigner. I was very sensitive as a child, was devastated by every instance of suffering and abuse and cruelty I saw, whether that was in my own life or on television. And back then, I saw a lot of violence around apartheid. The spread of leprosy was a really big issue at that time, and obviously things like seal clubbing was really big in the news too. I organized my first demonstration when I was 7, and I was organizing fundraising events for Save the Seals and Save the Whales around the same time. So the trajectory for me was direct. It was straight and it was true as an arrow. I spent my whole life fighting for animals, and sometimes getting swamped by the enormity and severity of it, but always knowing I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to make things better. You all know that choosing that path means making sacrifices. There's emotional, time, relationship, and financial. Most importantly, we sacrifice blissful ignorance and are forced to see way too much and to know too much. It's a very difficult path we've chosen. But it's been good for me to take stock, to look back as I've had to for this presentation, and to see that those decades mattered. Because when you're deep in the fight, you can't always see the progress. You can't always analyze and understand what you've been able to contribute towards that goal of animal liberation. And so this is it. This is my contribution. I helped close down Shamrock Farm. I helped close down Regal Rabbits and rehomed 1,000 rabbits. I gave talks in more than 100 schools, as well as cookery demonstrations, and trained dozens of volunteers to do the same. I got human education materials into every school in the country. I researched the link between violence to people and animals, wrote those reports, sent them to law enforcement workers. I stopped a cull of geese at Windermere, which I actually crammed into a 6-week gap I had, and managed to get that knocked out and moved on. I've delivered workshops on lobbying to activists. I handled Vegan News Media for its first 6 years, getting them into every national newspaper. That was my first headline, which I was relieved by. And I still get to return to work with Vegan News, which is a joy every year. I've written dozens of articles for magazines, hundreds of blogs, and the websites for quite a few of our groups. I scripted and produced the Animal Hero Kids film series for $1 Million Vegan. I wrote Vegan News' best-selling book, How to Go Vegan, and then I wrote their cookbook. I wrote ProVeg's School Plates Report, which has helped them switch more than 54 million meals from meat-based to plant-based, probably more by now. And that's a perfect example of passing on the baton. When I met Sophia from ProVeg last year, she told me they'd updated that report to make it more impactful, which was wonderful to hear. I helped coordinate large rallies in London with Lush and Brian May. I devised and spearheaded Veganuary's Celebrity Ambassador Program. I devised and created Veganuary's Celebrity Cookbook, which I believe is still the biggest draw they have for sign-ups even today. I secured high-profile supporters for Gen V's global campaigns, scripted and produced the award-winning Talking Head series of films for Veganuary, which featured celebrities, campaigners, and influencers. I've developed countless recipes, styled hundreds of them for photo shoots, and magazines and websites. I devised and created an ebook of recipes for people with different physical abilities, supported the launches of documentaries Christspiracy and Food for Profit. I supported the UK launch of Wicked Kitchen and the brand development of VFC, bringing the punk attitude and tone and creating some iconic imagery, which was a lot of fun. I was a trustee, now advisor, for grant-giving charities that support our movement. I worked in the field with undercover investigators to gather evidence that helped NGOs drive corporate change. I created the Earliest Votes for Animals website. I worked on a global campaign that challenged Pope Francis to go vegan for Lent, plus 2 subsequent campaigns, and helped generate hundreds of headlines that connected diet to climate breakdown internationally. I gathered celebrity support and launched the campaign to press the Earthshot Prize to highlight plant-based solutions to their crises of the planet. And I devised and led the campaign to make CCTV mandatory in slaughterhouses. And throughout, I gave sanctuary to hundreds of rescued animals. I hope there's still more I can contribute. Currently, I'm working with Animal Justice Project to take their incredible investigations a little bit further, get them to MPs, get them to ministers, and make sure they're having an impact absolutely as far as they can. I was recently delighted to work a little with Melanie Joy on her forthcoming documentary. If you'd like to know more about what she's going to do, please speak to her, maybe message her through Hoover. I'm working with Project Slingshot on their forthcoming launch, which is going to take down factory farming. Let's be positive about that. We're going to do it. And I've just written an animation called The Industry, which looks amazing. It just needs a home, so if anyone's interested in animations and wants to talk to you about that, please come find me. But for now, I'm going to end by fulfilling the promise of the talk's title and share a few things I have learned from the last 35 years. First of all, I just want to thank We Animals for the gift of the extraordinary images they have given to us as advocates and that allow animals to be present in the telling of their stories. Those images always serve to remind us who we're fighting for. Okay, here's my first bugbear. I get very uncomfortable when people say we shouldn't preach to the choir, because if we're not preaching to the choir is way more likely to leave. Making vegans is great, but we need to spend time and energy supporting them, particularly in their first year, so that they stay vegan. Preaching to the choir just really means supporting our community, giving people reasons to stay. I think preaching to the choir should be absolutely baked into our work. People give up too soon. They walk away because progress isn't fast enough, and I get it, it's frustrating. But I often wonder, what did they think was going to happen in a year? I mean, these things take time to turn around. Walking away from a viable campaign emboldens our opposition, so we need campaigns to be seen through, even if it means that becomes your life's work, your personal contribution to our collective progress. This was very much the case for me for the CCTV campaign. I thought if I could get that in my lifetime, that would be my contribution, and I'd be satisfied with that. As it happened, we got there a bit sooner, and I was able to move on to other things. Be careful not to assume. Testing often reveals that our assumptions, and sometimes even expert advice, is wrong. One example, a brilliant campaigner I know who works on companion animal campaigns once told me that using upsetting images for social media adverts just didn't work, and we should stick to cute adverts and cute pictures. We tested it for our campaign and found the exact opposite to be true. Please keep testing. Collect good people and let them collect you. That means giving of yourself, nurturing relationships. Many years ago, I met a journalist who was writing a piece about Romanian dogs coming to the UK, and my dog Alfie was one of the first to come over from Romania, so she wrote about Alfie's story. It turned out that journalist was vegan. And so we connected and we stayed in touch. We messaged each other pretty regularly, and we know each other's lives a little bit. I know her children. And each year I reach out to her from Veganuary, and she helps us get incredibly impactful stories into magazines. And she's been doing that for years and years. You don't know where your allies are going to come from, so please be open to finding them in the unlikeliest of places. I met with slaughterhouse workers and owners. I met with halal certifiers, corporate lawyers from the meat industry, which I have to tell you are probably the most revolting people on this planet. I met with industry vets and regulators, anyone and everyone. I met with a journalist from The Times who was a former Tory MP, very well connected politically, and he came at me with real attitude. But over the course of a meal, during which he deliberately ordered rare steak, I actually won him round, and he went on to write 3 articles about the campaign. In the first one, strangely, he called me an admirable lady. But in the last one, he said of the minister, only a monster would not make CCTV mandatory for slaughterhouses. And at that point, I knew we'd won. Here's a quick one. The loudest voices in the room are often wrong. Please make sure you listen to the quieter voices too. They've often seen things that other people have missed. And Liz referenced this already. There is not a single way that we're going to unlock our collective goal. We need all of our skills, all of our ideas, and all of our approaches. This often shows up in a debate between animal welfare and animal rights. But while we can and should and must keep talking about animals' rights, we should also acknowledge that a significant part of the progress towards liberation is actually through welfare. We need both, and crucially, one does not undermine the other. They actually strengthen one another. As individuals, we are not just one thing. And those early days when we were quite often given things outside of our actual job description shows how much we're all capable of. We're not just a campaigner or a fundraiser or a marketer. There's more to all of us. So why don't we try and find new ways we can contribute? Speaking in schools, doing street outreach, volunteering at sanctuaries, interning with a large NGO, they're all opportunities that allow us to see a bigger picture, to give more, to gain more, and to become better activists. There is hope. And if you don't see it now, I feel sure you will by the end of this conference, which is yet another example of how far we've come. Thank you to Liz and the team for making it happen. And finally, we need to find a way to keep going. The stakes are too high for any of us to burn out, and there is much we can achieve in our lifetimes if we can just sustain our activities year after year. With the luxury of the time I've had, I can see how far we've come. And with the privilege of working across multiple groups, it's clear to me that things are changing on many different fronts. And when judged by the long history of exploitation that we're working to overturn, I recognize that they're actually changing incredibly fast. So in another 35 years, if the good dog above spares me, I'll be 90. And my hope is that in 2061, one of you will be standing here, summing up the incredible raft of achievements you've seen and contributed to in your lifetime. And maybe you'll get to tell the story of an old anarchist, an old granarchist you once met, back in VARC 2026, who was seen slipping out of the UK's last factory farm with the last incarcerated duckling hidden up her jumper. Thank you.